I think this one's going to work. Okay, back to it. So as an undergrad, counting the bacteria, I also grew up fungi. And you could pretty much count how dense the fungi was in the soil, again, by diluting it and seeing to what dilution you would still get it. But these nematode worms kept showing up. Do you know what a nematode is? You know, as a master gardener, we learned that nematodes are the worms that can actually get into the roots and make galls in tomatoes and a couple different crops. Well, yes.
Could you speak up louder or
Okay.
use the mic or something?
Yeah, I think the mic.
That's the mic for recording. That's not a
Yeah, I'll speak louder. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. My outside voice. Anyway, what I'm going to present today is the story that I would like to tell as a mother, as to my mother. You know, what is it from a scientific perspective that I think everybody should know about mushrooms? And I'd like to start now if my, okay. Asking you the question, imagine life if you were a mushroom. What would life be like? So anyone want to share your thoughts?
It would be short.
Short. Okay. Mushrooms pop up all of a sudden and then they're gone before you can find them. Okay. Moist. Very humid. Dark. Good. Yeah. Community. So what do you mean when you say good community?
Fungi are usually connected.
All connected with each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I want to do the first half of this talk is present enough research that you really have a thorough understanding of what life is like for a mushroom. And so what I did, if you look at the handout 1, the first part, is I got busy with, let's see, yeah, handout 1. Busy with Gemini and wrote this poem, A Humble Spore. It starts with a spore. A speck unseen, it's microscopic. In darkened soil, a life begins, a silent worker hidden deep. Decomposing leaves and fallen sheep. With tiny threads, it weaves its way through rotting matter day by day, absorbing nutrients. It grows with might, a hidden force, a silent light. Then fruiting bodies rise above. Those are the mushrooms. Signals of love, a cap, a stem, a colorful show, as spores are scattered, newborns to sow. The life cycle ends, a new one will start as fungus plays its vital part. A humble worker, unseen and small, a silent force that is needed by all. Thank you, Gemini. I am not a poet, but I thought Gemini did a pretty good job of giving you the picture of it's not just the mushroom, the fruiting body, but it's actually the mycelium, the part that's growing underneath. To make that a little bit easier to imagine, I've got some videos from science research, but first, here's my overview. I'm going to give you the biological story of mushrooms from the perspective of a biology professor, okay? What are they made of? How do they find their food? And some of this is the latest research that just came out last summer. Why are they good to eat? Why are they good to have in your garden? And then I'll give you the rest of handout 1, which is what are good varieties to grow? If you follow my instructions, you will be a successful mushroom grower, and they'll be delicious, and I guarantee it. So I'm also going to tell you the story of the times I grew mushrooms when I was not successful, so that you won't waste your time doing that. Okay, so I'm actually a physiologist. I'm not a plant person, although I love plants. And when I was going to school, this might be the case for you too, fungi were in the plant kingdom. Do you remember that? I remember that. And the way we think about it now is with the SNP rule. So all of these are animals here. I guess I have to point like this. Okay. Here, the red, these are animals, the mollusks like snails, arthropods like bugs and insects, and of course you have amphibians like frogs. These are all the animals. And if you snip off right there where the red spot is, you will have a branch of the tree of life with all the animals on it. Does that make sense to you? Okay, now let's go back one step further and snip off this branch here. You will have a branch of all life on earth that has all of the animals and the fungi on it. So fungi are actually more closely in the tree of life to the animals than they are to plants. They definitely do not belong in the plant kingdom. The reason for that has to do with their chemistry. They have this molecule called chitin. Chitin is a molecule for structure that is also found in insects, crayfish. So some of its biochemistry is more animal-like. And you probably knew already that they don't have chlorophyll, they don't have chloroplasts, they can't make their own food. Like animals, they have to produce enzymes and digest food. So, picturing them like animals, how do they find their food? They need food in order to build chitin, and they find it by growing these filaments called hyphae. And the hyphae release enzymes, which are proteins that help them digest things. And they do this mostly on dead things, but you'll know about fungal infections that people can get. They can also live on living things, but it depends on the kind of fungus. Okay. So here's the structure of chitin. It's not that different from cellulose, which is the polymer that you find in plants. A big difference, though, is it has nitrogen in it. And cellulose is a pure carbohydrate, has no nitrogen in it whatsoever. And so chitin is the second most abundant polysaccharide after cellulose. And in the same way that people cannot digest cellulose, so cellulose is the fiber in your diet, we also cannot digest chitin. So chitin is a very good thing to put fiber in your gut. So when people start claiming, well, mushrooms are so good for your health, they are. It's about like Metamucil. They'll keep your gut working, right? And not only that, but they provide a substrate for your gut flora, the bacteria that live in your intestine and keep you healthy. Okay, so as a good nutrient for bacteria, it's not only delicious for us, but fungi are delicious. Mushrooms are delicious for your gut. And so living around here, foraging is pretty popular. And this one, chanterelle are pretty common, and they're easy to recognize. There's nothing that's venomous that looks like a chanterelle. So if you find chanterelles, you can pick them and you can clean them up and you can eat them. And one year in July, we went to our own yard and we foraged all of these. So this is a polypore. These are the milk caps. These are my favorite, the puffballs. Puffballs, when you cut them open, if they're white all the way into the center, you can eat puffballs. And if you put a bit of cream and garlic with it, they're absolutely delicious. I think the real problem is how do you separate the mushrooms you forage from the dirt? So I have this nice soft brush, and I can sit there for hours brushing at my mushrooms, trying to get all the dirt away from it. And you always get a little bit of grittiness in those foraged mushrooms that you eat. So I recommend for clean, safe mushrooms to grow them.
So do puffballs get large?
They get not really big, but they get larger, and then they have a hole in the top. And if you hit them, they'll spray out the spores. So if you catch those very same puffballs early, before they have that little hole, before they look brown at all, they're really delicious. But, you know, I had some again this year. They are so hard to clean. And you shouldn't wash mushrooms because they'll just soak up the water and become a soupy mess.
Do they still contain the same amount of nutrients, though? I mean,
You mean after?
it doesn't change their...
I'm sure the dirt is nourishing if it doesn't kill you. This is a Spanish saying, if it doesn't kill you, it will nourish you. But no, I mean...
just say washing them will make them a little bit mushy, but
I'm sure they're still nourishing. Yeah.
Okay.
But I love the consistency that mushrooms have. Yeah. Well, here's some nutrition research. A quarter of all the mushrooms grown globally are oyster mushrooms. Okay, oyster mushrooms in the United States are pretty expensive. And we don't normally buy the oyster mushrooms. We buy the little, what do you call them, button mushrooms. Yeah. The oyster mushrooms are very low calorie. They're low fat. They're high fiber. They have essential amino acids and minerals. The protein content is higher than any kind of vegetable that you can imagine, but it's lower than meat, not quite as much protein as meat. And they definitely give you dietary fiber, especially in the stipe, which is the stem part. And they have minerals, they have vitamin C, niacin. Here's the source of this. This was published in 2019. I find it very interesting that it's Asian countries who are doing most of the mushroom research. I think this one was done in China, okay? And so let me just move on to a little bit more research and talk about then the fungi. Remember, the fruiting body of the fungi is the mushroom, which is what we enjoy. But in addition to the fruiting body are all of these hyphae, these filaments. This particular one, this one is a bread mold. And you've probably seen how when bread gets moldy, you don't see it as much as you used to because they put these preservatives in it. But you'll find this kind of white, webby stuff. And then you find these little balls sticking up. And those little balls are going to release the spores, okay? So that one is aspergillus. It's harmless to humans. Those spores are not dangerous for us at all. But what I want to do is show now when a spore lands, what happens. So there it is, the hyphae growing out. Okay, those are the hyphae that are going to go out and release the enzymes to digest the nutrients that the fungi need in order to grow new chitin and in order to build the proteins, to have the enzymes to decompose material. And if you think about the whole web of hyphae together, it's called mycelium. So just a bit of vocabulary. So what do they do? Well, the mycelium, that makes up the mycorrhizal fungi, and they actually interact very closely with plant roots and help the plants take up nutrients. That's called the wood wide web. So all of the plants and all the fungi in the forest are all connected to each other, sharing. And it's the hyphae then that release the enzymes needed to digest all of the decaying material. So imagine what the forest would look like after a storm if we had no fungi decaying the old wood. And so that mycelium, you can sometimes see it on dead matter because it looks like the white webby stuff. So that's good. That's what you're after. Yeah.
So does this apply to that first description there, the
Mycorrhizal. Yeah.
So is that a particular species that's by itself?
Yeah, I think
or is this typical of all fungi?
I could go into that. There are a couple different types of mycorrhizal. They're endomycorrhizal and they're ectomycorrhizal. So some of them will get into the plant roots. Some of them will be outside the plant roots. That's also an active area of research, and it depends on the type of fungi. But there are many different types. I think in my previous slide, I think there are like 1,900 types of fungi.
But fundamentally, they communicate with roots of terrestrial plants.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure that bread molds do that, but the mycorrhizal fungi do. Yeah. Okay. I'm even not sure that oyster mushrooms do. This active area of research, I think there's more that we don't know than what we do know. Okay, but this, just as I was preparing this talk last summer, new research came out in July that I thought was fascinating, and I always love it when scientists make videos. Okay, so here's the video. they were wondering, how do fungi search for food? And so these people in Japan, this is PLOS Biology, this is a top journal in biology. It's open source, so anybody can look at these articles. They built this system where basically they have flow coming through here. The hyphae, which are microscopic, so all of this is shown under the microscope, they're growing from here, and what they did is they put glucose, a carbohydrate source, on one side, but not on the other side. So the fungi, as the hyphae grow, they have a choice. They can choose to grow toward the glucose, which, is produced by trees, and the trees may be releasing glucose from their roots, or they could choose to grow into the area where there was no glucose. And watch what happens. Can you see it growing here? Okay, I think that's fascinating. Chemotropism. The fungi, this happens to be the bread mold, which is a model fungus that's easy to get growing under the microscope. It's growing toward the glucose and growing away from the part which has no glucose. So this is one way in which the hyphae might search for their food. That's called chemotropism. Okay, what I think was even more interesting is what happened when they gave a nitrogen source. Remember that fungi need the nitrogen to build chitin. They need the nitrogen for DNA. They need the nitrogen for their proteins to make the enzymes. So let's see what happens when they give it. This is simply ammonia, so that's one possible nitrogen source. Again, the microscopic mycelia is back there. Look where it goes. It goes away from the ammonia. That's interesting. So then they tried a different nitrogen source. The one that you might put in your garden as fertilizer is probably a nitrate. So this is sodium nitrate. Let's just call it fertilizer. So here we have the mycelium back there. They have a choice, fertilizer or no fertilizer. Let's see what they do. They're growing away from the fertilizer. That's astonishing. The only way that makes sense to me is to think that as the fungi are going out finding something to decompose, if there's nitrogen there, maybe they interpret it by saying, oh, maybe there's already fungi there decomposing that thing. Let me go find something new. Anyway, it helps me realize that when I put a high nitrogen fertilizer around my plants, I may be repelling the fungi and making the fungi go someplace else. That's really interesting, and I think it would be worth some experiments. But if I think about my own garden, I really think that the mushrooms I see growing, it's not where I fertilize the garden. And if we want to be building up soil, we want to have as much organic stuff that doesn't have the high nitrogen so that the fungi will grow. So isn't that interesting? So to summarize, nitrogen is a limiting nutrient needed by plants. That's why we add nitrogen fertilizers for the green parts, in other words, for being able to do photosynthesis. But it's also needed by fungi for building proteins, chitin, and genes. So fungi grow hyphae to release enzymes and decompose things. But if they grow away from those areas with high nitrogen, they're not going to be doing the decomposition service that we count on. The enzymes are released by the proteins. They're made up of amino acids. So how is this possible that the fungi are growing to where there is no nitrogen? How can they then build their genes, their DNA, their chitin? More research. So this is same video. The music is from the scientists, so I'm going to apologize for their sense of humor. Here's more close, zoomed in microscopic picture of the different cells in the fungal mycelium. And they build traps for nematodes. Okay, and this is what I saw as an undergrad at Tulane University. I was looking at fungi, trying to count how long the mycelium was, and suddenly there's a nematode worm that's a microscopic, 1 millimeter long, caught by the fungus. I just thought that was repulsive. Here they're looking at the signals to show this poor nematode is like really dying. They do something called apoptosis. So this one is this, you might want to hear, can you hear the Japanese scientist and his sense of humor with the music? Okay, that's good because it's awful. So, traps the nematode. Do you know how many nematodes there are in the soil? Have you? Okay, this is the oyster mushroom. They do it a little bit differently. I'll show you this in a minute. We don't need to watch this yet. Okay. Okay, here's my yard. Here's the bean pole. And I've had years where I had like beautiful pole beans, but this year, for whatever reason, I didn't. But if you think about the bottom of the bean pole, that's about a square meter or a square yard. And research shows that there's between 1 million and 100 million nematodes in that kind of area of the land. And so imagine, you know, some of these nematodes are the ones that attack your tomatoes and squash, and what else gets the nematode galls? So if you put oyster mushroom spawn into your garden and not too much high nitrogen fertilizer, they're going to take care of some of the nematode problem for you. Okay. So I love mushrooms. You might have noticed if I go back, I don't really have much sun. So in my yard, my biggest farm is on the driveway because that's where the sun is. And what's worked for me is to make these straw bales and to early, like March or so, start putting fertilizers in there to decompose the straw. And you always get these mushrooms growing out of the straw. So my point for these mushrooms is that this is not edible. You don't want to just eat whatever mushrooms show up, but clearly the mushrooms and the plants are doing something good together. So my first attempt was thinking, okay, mushrooms don't need sunshine. My yard is perfect for growing mushrooms, especially this part on the north side of the house. The sun never, ever shines here, and no one ever wants to go and look at it because that's where our HVAC system is. And so I did what I read about online, which is log mushroom. You can actually, a tree came down in our neighborhood, so this would be the time of the year for it. I got someone to cut it into pieces. I drilled holes in it, bought some spawn, some starter, stuck it in, covered it with beeswax. I'm a beekeeper, so I had beeswax. And here's what happened. The mushrooms, the fungi, they definitely grow. They decompose the wood. But some little creature, I'm not sure if it was a chipmunk or could have been jumping mice, I would see these little mushrooms coming up, and before I got to pick any of them, they were gone. So I don't recommend this. We have too many critters in our yard for this. I worked so hard, and I got not one single thing from it. Okay. I even tried, do you know what this is? Mole and vole controller. It's a organic, it's got kind of mints, like flavors that they don't like, and it should keep the critters away. Didn't work. I spent a lot of money on that stuff.
But you're supposed to sterilize the logs before you put the spores in?
Because you might get something that shouldn't be edible.
Okay, and so how did you sterilize your logs?
No, but I know what a shiitake looks like.
Okay.
I just wouldn't eat anything that grew from it that doesn't look like a shiitake.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so here was my first success. And I'll pass this around. If you want mushrooms in about, I don't know, it takes a week to 10 days. Order from Mushroom Mountain, this kit. Oh, darn. Anyone have something sharp to open that with? And that's an empty box, Marianne. Yeah, she does.
Not a real knife. A real knife.
A real knife here.
It ain't much of a knife, but it's that.
See, we master gardeners are make-do people, aren't we? Okay, so you can look at it. It comes with a tent. We can unwrap it. Yeah, take a look. And you want to pass that around?
And have you tried different, places to get the kits? Do you like this?
I like Mushroom Mountain. It's in Easley, South Carolina. It's about an hour from here. I did a tour. I saw how sterile they are in their approach. So I don't think I'd bother ordering from anybody else. They don't charge shipping fees. That was $25. I order it one day and it's at my house 2 days later by, I think it's UPS. Comes with this tent, and I discovered that you have to put it near a window because the mushrooms grow up toward the light. So I just loosely cover it with a tent, and then I have this spray bottle to keep it humid. Really important to keep the little tent area where the mushrooms are humid.
So you grew these indoors?
In my kitchen, by the window.
How long will it last and what is the yield?
Yeah, so that yields, I would say, probably 2 pounds the first time.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it ends up cheaper than buying it in the grocery store. So why would I buy them in the grocery store? And they're so clean, you pull it off. I usually wrap it up in this paper again, stick it in a dark place, let it dry out. Then when I'm ready to get another flush, put it in the refrigerator for a day, soak it in my sink. You do have to soak it. Here are the instructions from the label. You do have to soak it about 3 hours, and I put a little bit of bleach in the soak water because the surface has mold that will grow on it and get in the way of your mushrooms. So a little bit of bleach will keep the mold away. And my second flush, I can see by the picture, that's the first flush. The second flush is about half that much. And by the third flush, I usually put 2 logs together, a new log and then the third flush log. So I've got more mushrooms than I can eat. I probably get 5 pounds out of 1 log. So $25, that's $5 a pound. But they're so clean and fresh. You pick it and you eat it right there. Okay. So that's the easy way to do it. But then I got interested in blue oyster mushrooms because these are the ones where I'd read the research about them catching the nematodes. So I wanted to grow these things. And the first one I bought, blue oyster, see how it's labeled warm. So if you look at handout 1, letter 2B at the bottom of the page. Okay. The first one is my favorite, the mulberry mushroom. And when you order it, it looks like this.
That's the picture you have on your handout?
The
The
names of the mushrooms, 2B, the first one is a mulberry oyster mushroom. Okay. And then if you look at the back, this is the warm blue oyster mushroom. And what I want to point out about them is that they will both colonize at room temperature. Do you see that? They colonize around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But the big difference is that the warm blue will only fruit between 50 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, summer. So the warm blue oyster mushroom is going to put me in a position where I'm competing with the chipmunks and the mice and the raccoons and whatever's going to come. And I just coincidentally bought this mulberry oyster mushroom. I grew it up. After I was done, and it looks like this, Okay. This, I'll pass these around. This died because I keep it, I'll show you in a minute, I keep it humid. And when the power went out, I couldn't keep it. I mean, I could have gone down 2 or 3 times a day and sprayed. I just didn't bother because I'd already gotten a flush. And if we open this up, you can pass this around. If anything falls off, just put it in. Yeah. Okay. And this is what I'll give away. If you smell it, it doesn't smell bad. It smells kind of a little bit like anise.
What type of mushroom is this again?
Oyster mushroom.
Oyster.
That's a little baby, like it hasn't grown yet. Yeah. So I'll show you a picture. So so to talk about oyster mushrooms, yeah, they have dietary fiber called beta-glucan. Beta-glucan, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What are we looking at there? Are we looking at the thing we're passing around after it's done producing mushrooms?
It's in the middle. I could probably get that to flush and produce mushrooms again. But this has already produced, I'll show you a picture of it, a huge number of mushrooms that were as big as my hand. Yeah, I'll show you a picture in a minute.
Like through the holes and grow
Through the
outside of
holes.
the bucket.
That's right.
Okay.
And the substrate is straw. So bale of straw, what is that? About $8 from Lowe's? But you want to find clean straw. So what's interesting to me, and this is why I like them so much, is they have a fiber. So this beta-glucan is the same kind of fiber you have in barley and oats. And if you cook that into a recipe, well, the food industry uses it to thicken low-calorie things because it looks like fat, but it's a low-fat, very healthy molecule. And so when you make a lasagna out of oyster mushrooms, that beta-glucan will make people think that it's a very rich, fatty recipe. And in reality, it's a low-cal, high-fiber oyster mushroom recipe. Okay, do you want to see how this kind of oyster mushroom catches a nematode? Okay. Remember, this nematode is only 1 millimeter long. That's like the smallest division in a ruler, and it's all under a microscope. This was published in 2023. And these mushrooms have little droplets, the oyster mushrooms. But he touched one, and he kind of, see how the tail kind of got stuck, and he can't keep crawling anymore. He's like stuck in that location. Like quicksand, exactly. And they actually did these studies to see what's changed in the sensory neurons. So basically the worm maybe gets kind of brain damaged and doesn't know how to navigate anymore. It's like turning the whole brain on at the same time. Okay, so let's look at handout 1, and let me go through now. So the logwood shiitake mushrooms, the oyster mushrooms are what I recommend, and I'll be giving out that as spawn if you want to take a handful later. But to grow them, the steps are steps 1 through 8 on the back. So let me go through that. The first step is prepare some buckets. So you can get those buckets at Lowe's or at a paint store. 5-gallon buckets, and you need to then drill holes in kind of a diamond pattern, about 1/2-inch holes. And what I did is Trevor drilled the holes, and then I got a glue gun and made them bigger and made the edges neat. Okay, you can see they're not very, very big holes. Doesn't need to be very big. You also need to list all the materials: the clean straw, stew pots. I like to use a big plastic tote so I can put everything together and mix it all together. And then this is the spawn that you order. This was also $25 from Mushroom Mountain. And then I use rubbing alcohol. You could use a little bit of bleach. You want to be as sterile as possible because all the fungi are going to be competing with each other, and you want to make it a good place for only your spawn. And then what I do is I have this garment bag, and I use it as a grow tent, and I put a cold water vaporizer in there. And this was just a couple weeks ago, hand-sized mushrooms. Look how many I got. And that's why I decided to give you a handout too, because when you grow all these mushrooms, you need to know how to cook them. This is the same bucket and the same spawn that I'm passing around there. Okay, so that was the first flush. If I had kept it humid, I would have pulled off the mushrooms and they would send out another mushroom until they exhausted their food source. So one step is to pasteurize the substrate. You got to picture all those other fungi that are in the straw. And so the way I do it, I buy the cleanest straw I can find. I measure out my 2 empty buckets to figure out how much straw I need. And then that's basically, for me, it's 4 stew pots. And I put it on the grill. Okay. My first place was to put it in our house. And it made the whole house smell like a barn, which I think is really pleasant. But not everybody thinks it's so pleasant. And now we have this stove inside, which is a convection, and so it doesn't work on these big pots as well as our grill outside. So boil it. They're about half full of water, totally full of straw, with the lid on so that the steam is also making the straw really hot. And then the hardest part is you have to wait 24 hours till it cools off before you do anything, because you don't want to put your mushroom spawn into hot straw. You'll find on the web, some people use bleach and soak it in bleach and then drip dry it, but this has worked for me. Yeah, Betsy.
How long did you boil it?
About an hour. Yeah, just about an hour. Yeah.
I just listened to a talk by Mr. Tomato from Hendersonville.
Yeah.
And he said, because he does a lot of that, the straw, growing all his vegetables besides tomatoes in the straw.
Yeah.
And he gets his straw, he said, not from Lowe's,
No.
but from somewhere on, I think, Hendersonville Highway. I don't
Okay.
think it's Blanchires, but what's that other one that's over there? That's what he said. He said
Yeah.
he gets a
Clean straw. You have to look around. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely clean. I mean, it's probably not going to hurt you if it's dirty straw, but it's kind of pre-decomposed. And you want straw that looks nice and fresh like that. It's not decomposed yet. Okay, then what you do is you take the straw and you break up the spawn into little pieces. And here's where I actually like to do it in a big plastic tote. But make sure that the bucket and that tote, whatever you use, is sterile. So wipe it out with isopropyl alcohol has worked for me. Because if you get a pathogen in there, it won't smell nice. Like, I really think this smells like nice, fresh mushrooms. And if you get a cultivation that smells funky, don't eat it, throw it out, start over again. So it's best to be sterile right from the start. When I first did it like this is probably a couple years ago, my first try, the spawn just kind of sunk to the bottom. So what I discovered is it's best to put some straw down, sprinkle spawn on it, put more straw down, sprinkle. You could do it like a lasagna, layers. That would be pretty easy. Okay, so after the substrate, next step is incubation. Take it and put it in a cool, dark place for about a week. And incubation, you look at that, that's the colonization temperature. So room temperature someplace. Don't put it outside because the bears might get it. So find a place in your basement. Here's the tent I was talking about. So I put it right into an incubation tent. And in the incubation tent, I have this humidifier to keep it from drying out. So what you're seeing here, that makes me sad. It's just all dried out, and that's why the mushrooms didn't grow very big. You can order them on Amazon, $17. After a while, the mushrooms actually give off lots of spores, and so it's not transparent anymore. They do need sunlight because they're going to grow toward the light. So I put a plant light. Do you see that? I just had that plant light, so I stuck it under there. It's also in a window, but that's the darkest place in my house. And then I bought many different kinds of cold vapor humidifiers. Don't buy this one. I bought more than one, and they all broke with all the spores. This one is amazing, the Drio. It's expensive, but I'm cultivating so many mushrooms. It's worth it because it has an app on my phone. I can see how the humidity is doing, and when the power goes off, I can reset it from my phone. I don't have to go down in the basement and see what's going on. And that's been going for 2 or 3 years without failing. So Drio, 4 liter. 4 liters is enough water that if you keep that tent closed, it lasts a long, long time. You don't have to refill it. And what I do, I was reading that actually high levels of carbon dioxide inhibit some of the fruiting body growth. So I go down there and I open it up and I let all the carbon dioxide out and then zip it up. And then it's the next day that I have really good mushrooms. So I have no research to prove that you have to do that, but that's what worked for me. So here they are to give you an idea for the timing. September 3rd, I was sterilizing straw. September 20th, you have the little baby mushrooms just peeking out. That's when you really have to start keeping the humidity up. And 3 days later, September 23rd, I had those big hand-sized mushrooms. So don't do this while you're away on vacation. Do it when you're home ready to eat the mushrooms. If you start growing mushrooms in the next week or 2, you're going to have them for Thanksgiving. I guarantee it. And they're delicious. So here's the next part of this story. This is the one about the mice and the chipmunks. So my first trial in April, when I put the spent straw out in my garden, because this is great mulch. It's been decomposed by the fungus. I saw it growing a few little mushrooms, another flush out in my yard. And those are the ones that the critters ate. I didn't get a single one of those. And this is the one, the mulberry. The reason it's called mulberry is because they found this growing on a fallen mulberry tree. And so the guys at Mushroom Mountain, they're very good at going out and taking some and keeping it so sterile that they know that they're growing pure mulberry mushroom, nothing else. And it's hard to get, but this time of year, it is available. It grows on all these different types of trees. But when I threw this one outside, this picture I took in January on a below freezing day. And every day I would walk by there to walk my dog in the morning and cut off 2 or 3 mushrooms, clean them up, and put them in my scrambled eggs for breakfast. It was delicious. So aren't they smart? This mushroom fruits in the cold so that it doesn't get eaten by critters, as long as humans aren't around. So that's what I'm going to do when I finish this mushroom spawn. If you don't take all of it today, I'll throw it out in the yard and hope that next winter when it's really cold, I get some more. Okay, so now we really need to look at handout 2, because if you grow mushrooms, you're going to have so many mushrooms, you really need to know what to do with them. And so what I like to do is make this mushroom ragu. And my ragu recipe has both shiitake mushrooms and oyster mushrooms. And for the shiitake mushrooms, I've gotten pretty successful at drying them out. So here at the bottom it says note 2, how to dry them out. You could put them in a sieve at room temperature. I actually just put them in a paper bag, and if I can keep them from getting wet, if I can keep them dry, they'll eventually dry out and become like hard little stones. Now I tried to dry out some oyster mushrooms just at the start of Hurricane Helene. You know how humid it was. It was raining every day for weeks. So I heat up the oven to about 170 Fahrenheit just to create a warm, dry place. Then I turn it off and then I put the mushrooms in there. But because it was so humid and then the power went off, they went mushy, they attracted flies, and I ended up throwing them all away. So if you want to dry mushrooms, I recommend drying shiitakes and not drying the oyster mushrooms. The oyster mushrooms are wetter and you just use them fresh.
Have you ever used a food dehydrator?
I don't have one, so yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure that would work.
Okay.
Yeah. To draw out the flavor, so you need to let them breathe. So you keep mushrooms in paper bags. That's why I have my whole collection of paper bags in the refrigerator. Check them all the time, because if they start going mushy, you might as well just throw them out. And to cook them, start with a hot, dry pan. Don't put oil first, because the first thing the mushrooms will do in that hot, dry pan is release water. And you want them to be spread out and have enough space that that water can just evaporate away. What you're doing is you're concentrating the mushroom flavor. And then when it starts to stick to the pan, which comes later, then add a little bit of olive oil or something like that. But not too much, because they'll soak up the oil. So that's my secret for making the ragu.
You have a good soup recipe.
I don't, but I think that would be good. Mushroom soup would be delicious. Yeah.
So on mushroom stems, my husband likes to cook, but he always throws out the mushroom stems. So I gather them up and I stick them in my freezer for future soups. But if you want to use them, sometimes they are a bit on the chewy side. So
Right.
what do you recommend for that?
Cut it up really fine.
Okay, so you just go ahead and use it the same as the heads.
I do. See, when I slice the shiitakes, look how white and beautiful they are. There's not a flaw in a single mushroom. And those shiitakes, they're like this big. They're not small. And the stipes, I just slice them up, but I try to slice it pretty thin because they are pretty fibrous. But remember, that's all the fiber that we need to be eating for our gut flora. So yeah, I wouldn't throw it out. But I understand people don't like that. So this is what I got. This isn't all that I got off these 2 buckets that one day, because I tried drying half of it and had to throw it away. But this is plenty to make a mushroom ragu. And I suppose you could freeze the mushroom ragu, but what I like to do is make lasagna. I got this recipe from the New York Times, and I've modified it a little bit. Because the oyster mushrooms have that beta-glucan, which is like a fat mimetic, but it's a low-fat substitute. This can be made with low-fat milk, little bit of oil on the bottom, and it tastes really rich, but it's not high-fat. Delicious. Okay, so that's my story. I've got to give credit. I highly recommend going to Mushroom Mountain. They're a little funky, and believe half of what they say, because they do make claims about the health benefits. And when I was there was a woman that clearly had cancer, and she was just looking for alternatives and buying some of their things that they produced. But I give them thanks, because they mail stuff to us without charge for postage. And research came from, 2019, China, 2023, Taiwan, 2024, Japan. I think we need more scientists doing mushroom research in the United States. But I don't think Department of Ag or National Science, I don't think that money is being targeted in that direction yet. And yet there's so many false claims made about mushrooms. And it's really good to be able to go to peer-reviewed research and get what we know is true, because other scientists have agreed that they use appropriate methods. And of course, thanks to Transylvania County Master Gardeners. And I have to thank Purdue, who provide me with technology. And when my computer stops working, I don't know how to fix things, because they'll always come in. As Professor Emeritus, I have tech support for the rest of my life, so I have to give them credit. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I really enjoyed giving this story to you. And do you know what this is? It's a flower. It's not a mushroom. But it couldn't live because it has no chlorophyll. See, it's a flowering plant. If it weren't for the mycorrhiza and the fungal mycelia that are in the ground underneath it, we wouldn't have that beautiful ghost pipe around here. So I want to make sure you know if you have questions. Yeah.
It seems like the latest trend is, a new trend is mushroom tea and mushroom coffee and that kind of stuff. You ever done anything like that?
I have, and I think it's awful. Kombucha.
Then we're aligned.
Yeah, my niece's husband started a kombucha business. And not only, I mean, who wants to drink mushrooms? But he then puts lavender or something like really awful in it. So I think there's a lot of fad stuff around. I like to stick to what to me tastes really delicious, like a mushroom lasagna or some scrambled eggs with mushrooms or turkey stuffing with mushrooms in it, and learn to concentrate the flavors and have the mushroom flavor where I expect it to be, not in something I'm going to drink. It's probably healthy, though. Probably has fiber.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, you're welcome. So